Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a Spanish wine from a producer called Castano, but unusually this is labelled as a GSM. This is the 2023 vintage of that. And normally you'd expect to see GSM as a designation for an Australian wine, meaning Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, or sometimes using the Australian synonym Maturo. However, as I've said, this is a wine made in Spain. And I think they're making it quite clear that while this may be a sort of a modern style wine, it's very much a wine from the old world, and thus the label specifies that this is a Garnacha, Syrah and Monastrell. And this comes from the Yecla region of Spain. So Bodegas Castano has a huge reputation of producing quality wines from the Monastrell variety in Yecla, and has been given much of the credit for the reviving popularity in the variety in Spain itself, but also for an upsurge in production in the region too. Now, the Bodegas began production in 1950 when Ramón Castano built the winery here. At the time, winemaking had largely been forgotten, had sort of taken a back seat in the Yecla region. Vineyards had been devastated here by the phylloxera bug, and Monastrell was simply being used to make uninspiring wines that were being sold in bulk to become parts of blends to bulk up wines from other regions. However, during the 1980s, Ramón Castano focused on producing high-quality wines bottled at the winery. And this opened the door for other producers in the region to make more of an emphasis on the grape variety and on the region itself. Today, Ramon's three children, Ramon, presumably Ramon Jr., Juan, Pedro and Daniel, have all joined the company and are involved in its running. Now, after his initial purchase, Ramon bought further vineyards and extended the estate. Today, they own almost 400 hectares of vineyards, so nearly 1,000 acres. This is all in Yecla and is divided between 4 estates. They have 2 wineries, all equipped with modern stainless steel temperature-controlled winemaking equipment, allowing careful control over maceration and extraction. They also have a dedicated underground barrel aging facility, which has temperature and humidity control for the aging of their premium wines, and there is other warehousing and storage as well. The Yecla region is about 50 miles inland, and the climate reflects the fact that this is where there's a transition between coastal Mediterranean influences and a more harsh and extreme continental climate. At the same time, the region is at quite high altitude, and that helps to moderate temperatures during the growing season. Rainfall here is low, and on average there's less than 300 millimetres of rain a year. So that would make it quite difficult to grow grapes, but for the fact that the soils here are predominantly limestone, and that's very efficient at storing the winter rainfalls for access by the plant during the growing season. The zone here sits at the eastern edge of the Cordillera Subetica mountain range, and most vineyards sit at altitudes between 400 and 800 metres above sea level. One of the results of the sort of quite poor limestone soils you've got here is that the vine gets a certain amount of stress later in the season, which is helpful in ensuring that the vines produce grapes with concentrated sugars and plentiful tannins. Now, as I say, Monastrell or Mourvedre is the principal grape variety here. It makes up about 80% of plantings. So I think the plantings of Garnacha and certainly the Syrah are probably more recent plantings. So Monastrell is thick-skinned, late ripening. It suits this region really well. It gives intense colour and some mouth-drying tannins. The structure and the palate length that provides makes it a really nice blending partner for the softer Garnacha or Grenache, and it also fits nicely with the spicy nature that you see with Syrah. Now, Bodegas Castano do really produce quite a wide range of wines. I have made video recordings of a few of their wines, and I will leave links at the end of this video so that you can follow those to those. I've always found their wines to be really well made and great value, so I'm very much hoping that this is going to be in the same mould. Now, their portfolio covers many styles in a range of price points. The varieties they produce include but aren't limited to Garnacha, Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay and Cabello. The overall aim of the Castano brand is to be approachable and affordable, and to provide a range of high-quality wines that suits a broad range of consumer tastes. This particular wine aims to be rich and fleshy, but silky smooth, with spicy notes overlaying red and black fruit on the mid-palate, and an easy drinking profile. So yes, the fruit comes from the company's own vineyards in Yecla, which lies within the Murcia region of Spain. Climate, as I've said, is a continental climate, but that's heavily influenced by its proximity to the Mediterranean Sea. The altitude of these vineyards lies at about 750 metres above sea level. The soils are stony and sandy with underlying limestone. Average vine age is a little over 16 years, they say. Now, I'm not given specifics as to whether that's an average across the 3 varieties, or whether, for instance, the Monastrell vines are older than that, and the Syrah vines could be younger than that. That information isn't forthcoming. Training is described as a combination of low-trained bush vines, but also some of the varieties being grown on trellises. Again, I'm not given the information as to what form of trellising each variety adopts. Yields are relatively low, but given the fact that these are likely to be widely spaced vines and that rainfall is so low, I would imagine that that's pretty normal for this region. That's given us somewhere between 2 and 4 tonnes of fruit per hectare. Now, the percentages of the different varieties and the blends that I'm given are that this is about 50% of Grenache with 25% each of Syrah and Monastrell. The fruit's entirely hand harvested. When you have the bush vines, that's essential. And also, if you're on high altitude vineyards, probably they're likely to be steeper, which rather mitigates against the use of machine harvesters. Fermentation took place in stainless steel tanks, and we're told fermentation temperatures are regulated to between 24 and 28 degrees C. So not particularly hot, probably aiming at quite a gentle extraction of tannins, and maceration, we're told, is short, going on for between 8 and 10 days. Subsequent to that, the wine is aged in barrel, but only for a very short period, just for 4 months. We're told that those barrels are 80% French oak and 20% American oak. There's absolutely no information given as to whether those are new barrels or old barrels. Given the price of this particular wine, I would assume that that's predominantly barrels that have been previously used for other wines. The other point I can see from the winemaking notes is that this is a wine that is vegan friendly, and it's marked on the label as being such. So I would assume that that fact is certified. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? Firstly, just to look at the colour, that's actually got quite a nice depth of colour. It's quite a dark, almost sort of black, ruby colour, slight purple hues. There's more of a sort of a ruby towards the edge of the rim. It's not completely opaque. I can see through the wine. Swirling it, it's labelled as having 14% alcohol, and slowly it comes to produce some tears on the side of the glass there. They're not particularly obvious, so I should imagine that's mostly just a result of the alcohol, and probably the wine is not enormously tannic. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Ooh. Instantly, there's a very spicy, there's quite a sort of a licoricey note, actually. Maybe a cedary hint, but really those are overlaying some very ripe fruit. There's almost a note of prune or very ripe black cherry. There's a rich hint. It's quite high-toned, slightly volatile. Almost some sort of chocolatey and coffee-ish hints. Just some sort of slightly structured hints of bitterness, perhaps. But then sitting behind that is a really lovely compote of red and black fruit aromas. The label here, I'm assuming that image is a jam spoon. There you can see a bit of jam coming down there. And this is quite jammy. There are ripe, slightly confected notes to the aromas. So let's have a taste, shall we? On the palate, that is quite mouth-filling. There's certainly quite a grip. This is not a massively tannic wine. There is a certain amount of very fine tannins that are drying the mouth out. That's where the sort of coffee-ish notes that I was thinking of, maybe bitter chocolate, hints of licorice, those sort of bitter notes overlaying some quite ripe. I was talking earlier about aromas of prune and very high ripeness, black cherry, those sort of notes. But there are also sort of ripe red cherry notes there too. Spiciness alongside black fruit. I'm thinking of Loganberries, that sort of thing. There probably is just a hint of sort of spicy oak coming in there, some cedriness. Maybe that's where the 20% of American oak is coming in, just to add a little bit of that flavour. The wine's got quite intense fruit. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a huge wine. It's medium to full bodied. I think in terms of style, the sort of thing I would be likening this to most is something akin to wine from the Rhone Valley, something like a Gigondas, not necessarily quite reaching the level of something like a Châteauneuf du Pape, but certainly not far off it. There's a sort of a spiciness, maybe some underlying meaty hints. Certainly there's a richness and a ripeness. There's a warmth coming from that 14% alcohol. There's a lovely length of flavour. That fine structure I was talking about starts at the very front of the palate and continues right the way through onto quite a long finish. There's enough acidity that there's quite a juicy, mouth-watering note at the finish, and yet at the same time that sort of underlying structure gives what's labelled as quite a New World style of wine, a GSM, quite a distinctly Old World flavour, and that's why I'm saying that this makes me think of good wine from the Southern Rhone, that sort of thing. Certainly, once again, I'm impressed by the quality and value for money that Castano have managed to get into what is not a very expensive wine. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available in your market, and if so, at what price. And I think if you follow that, you'll actually be quite impressed pricing wines as far as this is concerned. It's a wine that offers quite a lot for its price. Bear in mind it's made entirely from hand-picked estate-grown fruit. It's a versatile wine that could accompany quite a wide range of quite rich tasting dishes, and yet at the same time, to my mind, this is at quite an approachable, relatively everyday drinking sort of price. In terms of a score, I looked for a Wine Searcher aggregated critic score. The wine as a whole, and this vintage of the wine, doesn't actually have one of those at present. Personally, I'd be giving this a mark of 90 out of 100. It's a wine that's impressed me. It's easy to drink. I suspect it's probably a wine that you could keep for 4 or 5 years. It has sufficient structure, weight of fruit, and quite nice fresh acidity that I imagine you could age it, and it might smooth a little. At the same time, it's a wine that's very attractive now, and I do think I'm going to enjoy finishing off this bottle. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed watching the tasting. If you have, could I please ask you to press the like button? That would be fantastic. If you've been watching my tastings, you enjoyed them and you think you might like to watch more, it would be superb if you could consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. A growth in follower numbers would really help me to develop the channel further. To that end, if you have any friends who you think might like to watch these videos, do please feel free to share them with them. I would really appreciate your endorsement in that way. Finally, if you have any questions or any comments, do please pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else connected to that. So thank you again for your time. I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time in the near future. Come and join me for another tasting. Until then, bye for now.